Joining us now, she's two-time All-American at Florida State. I've said that often this season because she's had to tolerate me for a lot of UCF softball games on ESPN Plus this year when she's not doing Florida State softball or baseball, which she also does on ACC Network Extra. Plenty. And you'll be seeing her on Monday night, part of the WPF Draft show there with my good friend Chris Plank, among others. And I speak of Alex Powers, who joins us now. How you doing?
I'm good. Just busy, but busy living. Can't complain.
All right, I'm familiar with the voice by now. Let's first start about this Monday night. You're gonna be at OKC. But with a WPF draft. Just tell us a little bit about that. What the fans could expect to see on Monday night.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. The draft is going to it's the inaugural draft and the official first season of the Women's Professional Fast Pitch League with Lauren Chamberlain, former Oklahoma Sooner standout and USSSA Pride player, and just so much ahead. We've got 4 teams in the league right now, and there's going to be 6 rounds projected for pickups. And it's just going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be in the Oklahoma City area at a nice little venue there and just have a great night celebrating softball and something that's bringing ultimately all of us together.
What are you looking forward to seeing the most this summer? You called games for WPF last season, kind of that as Lauren Chamberlain, the commissioner, kind of said it was kind of a soft open. We're trying some things out, but now you've grown it to 4 teams. What are you looking forward to most this upcoming season?
I'm ready to see just flat out competition, and even playing field is definitely what's desired. Just a lot of good competition around the country between the 4 teams. We have the Oklahoma City Spark, the Texas Smoke, the Smash It Sports Vipers, and then the USSSA Pride. And they're all going to be held and playing at different venues across the country, and just so much good talent out there. And I'm excited to see these athletes coming out of college, furthering their career, and then also just the athletes that have been in the game for a couple of years already, and at that level. And I'm just pumped.
Yeah, you're gonna be get to work with Chris Plank and a cast of thousands over there for this big production going on.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, and it is going to be streamed, and I can share that link with you later, Eric, too. But it's going to be streamed for free out on YouTube and hosted on the USSSA Live platform, but really just utilizing that YouTube link. And yeah, I've never worked with Chris, so I'm really excited to see what he's about and sit alongside him.
That's gonna be a lot of fun. Let's talk a little bit about your broadcasting year. You've been busy, like I said. You've worked a lot. We've worked a lot together this year on ESPN Plus, which has been awesome to have you throughout the year for the UCF games. But you also do Florida State softball and Florida State baseball. You balance all that out. So how has that been going for fans that have been tuning in? Because your workload has picked up this year.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun though. Yeah, I have had almost 40 games so far this spring, so it has been hefty, but I've had a great time doing it. I mean, anytime I get to go out there and just continue sharing my love for the game of softball, and then now it's obviously trickled over into baseball because they are so similar. I can't complain. So I'm really just lucky, and I work hard to be able to make it work between that and my full-time gig and everything else with work. So I love the opportunity, and I just want to see the sport continue to grow.
I remember you telling me when you said you decided you were going to retire as a player, one of the things you were going to do is go more in on broadcasting. So this was part of the plan when you decided to hang them up and not play anymore, that I can go full out and broadcast. Just talk about that decision process as like, hey, I'm going to go all in here once I'm done playing. Because when you were playing, you felt like you had too many things. You had to worry about a season to prepare for. You just didn't think you could handle a full slate of broadcasting at the time. But now you can because of your retirement in part.
Yeah, I think that it's a very personal decision anytime an athlete is heading into the end of their career, right? Playing, because for so many of us, it's so much and really all we've known for such a big portion of our lives. But I just was so confident in my decision to retire back in 2021 that I was just certain, and I knew that it's what I wanted to do. I already had, a full-time job that I was participating in and working at. So that transition kind of was minimal and seamless because I'd already been doing that. But as it pertains to the broadcasting, I think that's something we as former athletes, right, have up our sleeve is how can we stay involved in the sport and what does our impact look like? And some people opt into the coaching route, and some people do the private lessons or the personal lessons, or just simple like advisement and things like that. And I don't think that there's any wrong or right answer, but mine, I just wanted it to be sharing my love for the game and talking about it and informing and educating as many fans of the sport that were there. And I hope that I do right by those people that listen on the broadcast, because that's a big piece to me. And that's something that as an athlete, I was most passionate about, was just the how can my mental game improve, and how can my softball IQ, continue to get better when my physical abilities kind of max out. So
Tell me the different. What's it been like? Because this is your second season doing baseball over there, going to FSU baseball game, and preparing for a baseball broadcast versus preparing for a softball broadcast.
yeah, I think that's been an interesting challenge that I've experienced. So a lot of people think that softball is just so much faster, because in theory it is, with the length of the games and things like that. But I will say that baseball gets sneaky fast, pitch to pitch. And so while that might be like the waiting time is between pitches, I think once the pitch is thrown, there's really a lot going on. And also I think that the hardest part too is on the side of softball. Like, I've been there, I've done that, and I've lived so many of the things that I get to talk about. But on the side of baseball, of course, I've never lived it, right? Because I've never formally played baseball, but I take what I learned and experienced on the softball diamond and try to translate it similarly, without acting like I know exactly what these guys are thinking and doing, right, and working on. So much of it does cross over similarly, but I also try to appreciate and acknowledge and respect the fact that it is also different.
It is very different because I've had to do some baseball myself this season as well. As we're talking, you're preparing to do Florida State, Virginia this weekend. By the time this airs, that series will have been played. But what's been your thoughts on the Seminoles this year and Coach Alameda? Of course, they swept Clemson recently, big series sweep. What's been your thoughts seeing them up close and covering them this year?
I'm a Seminole through and through. So any chance I can get to give my Knowles some love, I think it's well deserved, though. They work hard for it. And I think one of the things that I've always loved, both as a player and now as a fan and alumni of the program itself, is Florida State takes so much pride in their preparation and their information piece of the game. They're going to always say that, we're not always going to be just physically person for person the best team. And sometimes we are, but we're not always. And that's okay. We can still find ways to win. And they take so much pride in that, and they work so hard on that. And again, as an athlete that played there, I just remember every single day that the foundational skills and the fundamentals that we would work on and then try to capitalize on and then improve upon and things like that. But so much of our basis of work and foundation that we built off of was just the day in and day out, monotonous, just show up and figure it out, right? And I respect that a lot, because I think that sometimes that's kind of the less glamorous side of the game, but it's something that Florida State has always been and really become a powerhouse in recently as well.
Describe preparing for a broadcast versus preparing to play a game. Are you more nervous with one or the other? Like, give me a breakdown, like compare that.
I that's a good question. I've never been asked that. I think that they're different levels of nervousness. Preparing for a game, I think so much of it is second nature, because we've been doing it for so long throughout our lives, and it's like the hours and hours and hours of work that are put in do become second nature to so many extents. But I think that there is something to be said about having to show up and perform physically, that you just can never relate anything else to it, because everything else is mental, it's emotional, right? It's all these other things, but just physical flat out performance is something that's so unique, bar none, to just sports, right? I think similarly on the side of broadcast preparation, so much of that goes into intellectual preparation and knowledge and understanding, right? How to have conversations, and then how to still perform under pressure, though, because so often in a broadcast, you've got, one opportunity to really tell a story that is something that you care about and that a lot of people around you care about. And so I think that levels of pressure are similar, but also very different, to what they're about. But that's something that I have found to be most exciting, because you can put in so much prep work to a broadcast, but then when the moment happens and the game is on, I mean, like it's go time, and so you just have to be able to perform.
Does broadcasting, has that helped kind of fill that hole, that rush that you have as a player being on the field? Has that helped?
Absolutely. I think that's what fills my cup in that way, that level of pressure and that level of performance. I definitely feel that in the TV space in general, because I think it's so funny. I say this every time I work with new people. I'm like, wow, you get somewhere an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours before a production, right? But then, I mean, 1 minute, 60 seconds before it starts, it is like just flat out scramble mode. And it's awesome though, because it's just kind of like you get the butterflies, and then it's just like game on, like, let's do this.
How do you feel you're different today as a broadcaster than you were, say, a few years ago? Because you've been doing it for a few years, but it's kind of like stopgaps. You would do some games, but you couldn't commit fully because of your playing career and your regular job, obviously. But now that you've done, like you said, over 40 games this season, how do you feel you're different today than you were maybe say 2, 3, 4 years ago?
Yeah, well, I'm going to spin that question and ask you how I'm different from a couple of years ago as well, having worked together. But I think that, when I first started, it was very conversational and it was very fun to me. And it was just something that I'd always known. So I was able to kind of just do it casually, right? I think probably more recently, I've started to kind of shift that mindset. And I take a lot of pride in what I'm representing and the stories that I'm telling, because so much of that is exemplified throughout other people's careers and successes, right? And I just think and have thought a lot about too, like if I was an athlete on the field, how would I want my story told? And I think that that little mind shift alone has really taken my level of seriousness and preparation and the amount of time that I'm working on and the amount of money that I've invested too to get better at this stuff as well as I think the biggest difference maker that, it's a lot more serious to me now. And not that it always wasn't, but it's a job and it's something that I'm now owing other people because they deserve to have a good story told.
I also have noticed because we worked together 2 years ago, and
Mhm.
this year I got to work. And one thing I noticed one of the differences is your command on replay. Like you like analyzing replays of certain plays to kind of tell the story of that play that goes beyond just, hey, that person hit the ball into left field. You wanted to analyze what the defensive alignment maybe was in a specific play or the swing itself. So just take me through that because I've noticed that this year you've taken more like you would come up to our producer director. And I'm kind of giving the audience kind of a behind the walls deal here, but there are times where you'll go and say, "Hey, can we look at this play again? I want to show something that I noticed, whether it be a runner leaving early and why they stuff like that." So just talk about that because that's one big difference I've noticed from you this year from the last time we worked together.
Yeah, I think, well, one of that, points is just really confidence in it and what I'm speaking on. But the second one is if you hear about or if you listen and know about what it is that I love about the game of softball and even baseball is that education piece and that preparation piece. And it's the small intricacies. It's not just the flat out, oh, I swung hard and I hit the ball really solid, right? So it was a home run, but it's was I sitting a pitch? It's what did I do to get that result, right? And so much of my analysis now comes from the preparation or the setup. And that is, again, like if I sit here and talk to everybody about what it is I love so much about the game of softball, I think that shows in the way in which I broadcast about the game of softball or baseball too. And I think so much of that just ties into and as a result of how I approached my playing career was I got to a point where my physical ability maxed out, and I was going to be as good as I was. And because, I'd put in all the work, I'd made adjustments, I'd made small tweaks here and there throughout my career to physically be the best that I could. Then it was like, how do I continue to elevate my game? And that's going to come from the softball IQ piece or the educational piece. And so if I can sit here and inform others of, hey, here's ways to be successful, it doesn't, there's not only one route to the top, there's multiple. And so follow your route. I feel like if I can educate and inform people of the differences of how to reach excellence, then I'm playing my part, right? And that's again the way that I give back to the sport. So thank you. I appreciate the fact that you say that that's shown in my just broadcasting and my analyst work, but that is ultimately true too. Why I just love the game.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I noticed, and some of the audiences noticed because would get feedback. They've enjoyed that aspect of it of the broadcast because people like you and Francesca Nea, who's another person I work with, you both have similar styles in that regard. You're both really good at analyzing the replay and making it simple for the audience. You don't want to overcomplicate, but at the same time, show them some things that maybe they didn't notice live.
Right. It's the
Uh,
fun part. It's a fun stuff.
Let me ask you, obviously, with your softball credentials, it's easy when you talk to coaches and players. They know who you are. I've done conference calls with you. They know who you are. It doesn't take super long where they talk about, well, Alex, you know what it's like. So that always comes up. I'm curious, when you started doing baseball, how did that transition go? Was that a difficult transition? Did you have to kind of earn their kind of respect? Did they know who you were? Like, what was that like on the baseball front? Jessica Mendoza obviously is the one that everybody knows that's done it, but you've been doing baseball now a couple of years. What was that transition like when you talked to baseball coaches and players?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I think that at first the male coaches probably are like, huh, interesting. She's gonna be my analyst for the weekend, and there's maybe that level of curiosity of like, what are her credentials? Who is she? But I will say that I've always been met with a lot of respect and understanding. And I think one of the coolest things most recently was I was the only analyst on an FSU baseball broadcast. And that was the first time that a female was the only color analyst, which was really cool. But I got to sit there and I talked to Link Jarrett, who is the Florida State baseball coach. It's his first season, but then they were playing Boston College that weekend, and I got to sit on. There was one linear game that weekend too, and it was Mike Rooney and Chris Cotter on the call as well from ESPN side, right? And then I was on the digital broadcast side. So we're like on this call with head coach Mike Gambino, and I asked a question on approach and mentality and mindset and preparation, and he kind of like paused and he's like, "That's a really good question." And I was like, "Thanks, coach. Like, I appreciate it, but what does that look like?" And so I think just once you start showing up and showing that, hey, I know this stuff too, and I might not have played it, but I played something else very similar at a really high level, and I deserve to be here, and I want a seat at the table. So it's been really cool. It has been a little bit frightening though.
What was the biggest adjustment you had to make? I'm curious, like when you got into baseball, and was there anything from the softball experience broadcast that helped you get to the baseball?
I laugh because my head goes to pitches,
Yeah.
the different pitches,
Oh
right? So
yeah.
I'm learning how to not be too specific because in the event I misspeak and it's off speed pitches, it's breaking balls. I'm not specifically saying, oh, the slider, the cutter, the changeup, the this, right? And I think one time my cousin, he pitched at the University of Florida, and he's now in the minor league system too. And I asked him, hey, what's the difference of a curveball and a slider? And he goes, oh, a curveball has that up to down movement. And I was like, wait, what? Because like in softball, the curveball's, east to west. And in baseball, the curveball's north to south. So I was like, that sounds completely backwards. And so I always have to have like a little bit of a laugh. I think I used a couple expletives too when I gave my like, what the heck do you mean? Right. And so it was just funny, but it's been those concepts where they are so similar. So I understand, but sometimes they're completely different.
Very different.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious. Did you get something from baseball broadcasting that you've applied to softball broadcast?
I think I like some of their phrases that they've picked up, just like whether they're talking about, the physical stature of people or just how smooth people are and just some of the small intricacies like that. And I think that those, though, are picked up in general, whether it's baseball to softball or just like high level, really good announcers at any sport. You find things that people say or analogies used or references made, and you're like, wow, I like that. I'm going to use that. So that's probably been the biggest thing.
Now the other thing, last year during the regionals, you did studio. I believe for ACC Network because Brittany McKinney was doing a regional, so they brought you in to do. What was that experience like to do studio? Because you're one of the few people that I know that you've done now the studio part of it, and you've done baseball. You're doing soft, so you've got a lot of hats you've had to wear the last couple of years. What was that experience like for you?
It was so fun. I loved the ability to be in studio. I think just getting in front of the camera and being able to have really good conversation with people that are obviously really good at hosting shows, right? And giving people the stories that it is that they're interested in. And so I think the hardest part to that was, there were so many things going on at once because you have all these ACC teams that made postseason. And now it's like, what regional are they in? Who's in their regional? How are they doing in their regional? So like you had a lot of information to continually keep up with. And not only that, again, trying to tell that story, right? That is so important of who is playing well. So not only what team, but what individuals and what athletes are really shining in this postseason moment. And how can I again give them the recognition that they're deserving right now based on their performance? And so I think that just ties into the earlier conversation of the pressure and the things like that made it so fun, but also so tough, right? And that's why you do that stuff because it's the thrill of performance and the high level and high pressure situations, but really you're just wanting to put out a good product. But the studio stuff was amazing. I loved it, and I will do it time and time again if given the opportunity.
If you get that opportunity down
I
the
get
road
that opportunity, right?
again, what's one thing you learned from that experience that you'll remember to apply the next time?
Ooh, there's so many things I learned, even just on air presence of how to show up and how to talk to a camera. Stillness is one, but also still being like theatrical a bit, right? Because you want to have emphasis, you want to show excitement and dramatic nature in your conversation and stuff too. But there's so many things that I learned being in studio that, just broadcasting behind the scenes and behind, the intricacies of the game. Because really, when you're broadcasting, you might have an on-air moment or two in front of the camera, but like so much of your work is really just your assessment and your vocal work, right? And then being on camera in studio, completely different, and the way you have to show up was completely different. So it was a hard challenge, but so much fun.
Is what did you have like how would you compare the kind of preparing to do studio versus preparing to do a broadcast?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think in preparing now would look a lot different. I think then I didn't know what I was getting myself into because I'd never done it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like I got in there and they were just like, "Have you ever read this and a script like this and this?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, no, I've never seen anything like this," right? And so now going into that kind of stuff, I would know what to do a little bit better. But it was so cool because they got wind that I had covered a little bit of baseball as well last season. So I mean, they threw me right to the wolves in the best way possible because it was like, hey, like, yeah, we're going to highlight not only ACC softball for regional weekend, we're just now having the tail end of regular season ACC baseball. So let's read a couple lines and read a couple scripts from some highlights that we're going to run through on this episode. So again, like I think the preparation would look much different for myself now because I would also understand too the way in which the shows operate, what the shows are really predicated around, and the highlights that people really care about and want to see.
Is sideline something you would want to like look into and experiment with? Some people like it to do it, and some people get their start doing sideline and still do commentary. I think of a Katie George, for example, who's on ACC Network, who does sideline for football, for example, but is an analyst on the volleyball. She was a former volleyball player. Is that something that would even interest you down the road if that opportunity presented itself?
Absolutely. It all ties together just in that storytelling concept, and I think that kind of what you just said there, Eric, was the fact of like, especially with sideline reporting, like I know what it takes to be a high level athlete, just not in every single sport, right? But so much of that is similar across the board within sports. And I think that as a sideline reporter in that way, that is kind of the component that I could bring to the table of, hey, I know what it takes in a different sport, but I know what it takes to get to the top and to be alongside the best, right? And so I think that that's something that's very consistent as opposed to the analyst side or even the studio host side. I think that you have different skill sets for each, but some of those skill sets are really transferable.
Let me ask you about the ACC because I know you look at it, you follow it with Florida State, but you follow the rest of the league. You know what Valerie Cagle's been doing this year as a National of the Year, Player of the Year candidate. Clemson, despite that sweep with FSU's having a big year. Duke's having a great year with that young core that they have. Virginia Tech's had some ups and downs. Obviously, you would expect that with the loss of Keely Richard, but they're still having pretty good. Give me your overall thoughts so far, your takeaways from the ACC this year.
ACC is just really becoming a powerhouse and it's so fun to watch. And it's something that really fires me up because those four schools that you just mentioned between Florida State, Clemson, Duke, Virginia Tech, they have so much talent. And I think the thing too is, when I went to Florida State, like, we were really good. Obviously, we were ranked number one in the country for periods of time, went to the World Series a couple times, the whole nine. But the conference as a whole is just what's so impressive. And the way in which programs like Clemson and Duke are so new in creation and absolutely just making a way for themselves and a really big name right now across the country. And, Clemson specifically is somebody that people just don't want to come across. Valerie Cagle is so impressive, and I sat on the coaches call the other day with Joe Harden from Virginia, and she was just like, man, Valerie Cagle, I feel like she's been there for 10 years. Like I'm ready for her to graduate, but that's the consensus of teams across the country. And I love that because it's fun to talk about multiple teams and it's fun to have really good competition throughout the entire season.
It really is. Of course, it's going to be interesting how it plays out. For Florida State, still got to go to Blacksburg later in the season. Of course, the ACC tournament will be in South Bend. The league is currently the fourth strongest conference in college softball. And something you've told me that one thing you think it's made a big difference is the facility upgrades. It's way better now that you said that it was when you were playing in the league.
Absolutely. It's so good, right? And it's so much fun. Actually, that was one of the other topics on the coaches' calls earlier this week of, I think the joke was made like, oh, I think in our old facility, we could have won an ACC championship, on our old field. And it's like, actually, no, we couldn't have. We needed those upgrades. We needed that revamp because so much of that ties into so many things. We just heard it, you and I, Eric, from Coach Bredbender at Wichita State, and it was like, hey, we needed that revamp of our facility and of our field because it helps recruiting, and that's something that Lonnie Alameda has talked about at Florida State. That's something that we've seen recently with Tim Walton over there at KDC Sol Presley, and it's just so many good things to come of what is really happening for the game of softball. OU is another one, Texas A&M is another one. All these programs are having phenomenal stadiums and venues.
You mentioned Christy Bredbender. You got to cover, obviously, some of the American with me there with the Wichita State UCF series. Wichita State since then had beat Oklahoma State. They're trying to make a push to host this year. We got a chance to talk to Coach Bredbender and got a chance to see Sydney McKinney, who's another player that currently, once again, is leading the nation in batting average and hits. What's your thoughts on the Shockers that people are starting to take notice with McKinney and what they're doing over there in Wichita?
So much talent, and that's something that I love to see is just all these programs that are not necessarily your Power Five schools, right? Your mid majors, and they're really making a name for themselves, and they're able to go out there and just flat out compete with the best of them, within the Power Five. And I think that that's awesome because I think in the past we were never really in that boat, and we were never ready to cross that bridge, right? But now it is, and that's honestly thanks now to the transfer portal as well that has largely benefited so many programs because they're able to pick up those kids that might have gone to a number one, number two school in the country. They're great recruits, but they might not ever play there, because there's so many great recruits that go there. And so you're really just evening out the playing field so often.
And of course, UCF, you've got to cover them there. Jessica Barrels, your teammate, was at the regionals last year, hanging out in the left field lounge. What's your been thoughts on the growth of the UCF program? You've talked to Coach Ball Malone on many occasions. Young team this year, kind of had some lumps early, but they're starting to peak now, make another push for the tournament. Of course, their big move is coming as they're going to the Big 12 next year. What's your thoughts on UCF moving forward as they go to the Big 12?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think what Coach Ball Malone and her staff, though, is doing right now is so admirable. I mean, the strength of schedule that she's playing is one of the most impressive things. I mean, her out of conference schedule was just crazy, right? It was one of the top in the country, and she's just flat out exposing her team to really hard games and really great challenges and opportunities to get better for opportunities and chances just down the road, right? And those moments of maybe early on failure or early on learning moments, I think that they kind of stick with athletes because I think the things that we experience when it's times of failure or just difficulty stay with us, and then we really have that other opportunity to then capitalize on it later, which hopefully for UCF and Coach Ball Malone, that's in postseason, right? So early on, losses or things like that late in the ball game, losses that they experienced in extra innings and things like that will help them down the road. And I think that that's one of the things she should be most proud of.
No doubt. And it's going to be exciting if they can make the tournament. Could be some noise. Could see another Florida State UCF matchup in a regional. We're quite familiar with that. Who knows? Down the road, Florida also in the mix there. We'll see what that plays out. Last question for you. Obviously, you'll be part of the WPF Draft Show Monday night from OKC. You know that place very well. As you look at the national scene this year, what's your thoughts as far as teams that you think are teams to watch as far as who can make a run to OKC?
Well, we of course know that Oklahoma is having a phenomenal year. Your typical UCLA's are doing great. And Oklahoma State, I think, is one that I think it pains me a little bit because a couple years ago they ended Florida State's season, but at the same time, like it's just really impressive what Kenny Gajewski has done over there and what he has brought to that program and how he's really helped bring a shift overall to their success. And of course, I want to see my Noles there, and Clemson's also just having a heck of a season. I would love to see another ACC team in that top 8 at the Women's College World Series. So I'm excited for what's ahead, and I think that the game of softball as a whole is there's just only room for continued improvement. And it's so fun to see because the viewership numbers are so high now and the total attendance numbers are so high. So I'm fired up for it, and I can only imagine what mayhem will bring.
Is that the next step? I've talked to a lot of ACC coaches that have told me the next step for the conference is to get that second team into the World Series, not just Florida State. They thought last year might be the year. It didn't pan out. Is that the next step for the league, is to not just have Florida State represent the league, but have other teams? Clemson, I know that's their goal. Talking to John Rittman this year, is that group to get to OKC. Duke's obviously that, Virginia Tech, et cetera. Is that the next step for the league, is to have that multi-bid World Series appearance for a conference that we've seen the SEC and the Pac-12 and the Big 12 do?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it goes without saying, of course, bar none, right? And if you break it down a little bit more granular, it's really just having several teams get to that super regional tournament and just flat out compete, taking teams to game threes, right? But of course, everybody wants to kind of leap a little bit ahead and just say, no, we need two teams at the World Series. And I think that either one's a viable option, but really just having that great postseason presence. And I think that that alone will really set the ACC apart and just continue to make them a big contender across the country.
That's Alex Powers, two-time All-American at Florida State, commentator. She's all over your ESPN platforms. She's doing Florida State baseball, she's doing Florida State softball. Will be part of the WPF draft. And I know your schedule constantly gets updated, so I won't tell you what you got ahead because it's fluid. Things always get add up to your desk. But I will ask you to tell the audience where they can follow you to keep up with what you're up to.
Yeah, I love it. I'm definitely on Instagram. Twitter is a little bit lacking, but keep up with me on Instagram. My handle's at Alex Powers, two X's because somebody had just the regular name. So that's where people can find me. And I typically do post when I'm covering games. So this weekend's Tallahassee. In a couple weekends, I'm over at South Florida, actually out in Tampa. So that'll be a lot of fun. And then finishing up some games in Tallahassee. So
Well, that'll be a lot of fun. It keeps expanding. You're expanding this. You're driving there in the state there. Like, what are you doing? Tallahassee, Orlando. You got Tampa. You said.
Yep, I'll be at USF. A lot of things ahead.
Wow. See,
Yeah.
now I got to keep up with you, and I'm your friend. Well, let me just say it's been awesome working with you this year. I know we've done a ton of games. You got really you did a lot of work there. It was like your second home for a while there at the Plex.
That it was. That
You
it
were
was.
fed. You were fed. In fairness, by the fans, they appreciated that, and I appreciate you. I know from this busy schedule as you're preparing for your broadcast and for the draft to talk to us and give us an update on how you're doing. And always enjoy, as you know, talking to you and enjoy working with you. So have fun, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Elo. Always good to see you.